Hello, I'm Jeremy Fooster with The Wrap. Since the writer's strike began, much of the focus has been on television, as the WGA's leaders and members have called out what they say is an existential threat to writers' rooms. But there are also thousands of WGA members who are primarily screenwriters for feature films. And in a landscape where many types of movies are getting pushed to streaming rather than theaters, the compensation for these movies is changing in a way that the writers are hoping can be reversed with this strike. So join me to discuss how the strike affects screenwriters and what they're fighting for are Michele Mulroney, a member of the WGA Negotiating Committee, and a screenwriter whose credits include Power Rangers and Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows. We also have Stuart Beattie, a screenwriter for Collateral in Australia, Zack Stentz, co-writer of X-Men First Class, and Gareth Dunnet Alocer, screenwriter of the upcoming DC superhero film Blue Beetle. Everybody, thank you for joining us here at The Wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
So let's get started with explaining to our viewers the two-step process. This is the way in which screenwriters are compensated as they work on these movies. Michele, I'll start with you. Just explain to anyone watching who may not be familiar what the two-step process is and what has been happening recently that has caused that pay structure to erode.
Thanks, Jeremy. I mean, can I just give a little perspective before we start when you're talking about the thousands of our members that are screenwriters? About 25% of WGA members work primarily in features. And of that 25%, about 50% also double dip and work in television sometimes. So I just want to give that perspective as we proceed with our conversation. But you're asking a really important question about the need for two-step deals. And I wish I could say that the need for a two-step deal was a recent development, but actually in the early 2000s, about 20 years ago now, we started to see one-step deals popping up. And this was a new phenomenon. Prior to that, it was very typical for a screenwriter in their contract to have what we call a draft and a set, meaning a first draft, a rewrite, and a polish. That was pretty standard. Then all of a sudden, these one-step deals started popping up, and we all freaked out a little bit. We're like, what is this about? And so for the last 20 years, one-step deals have been proliferating, and they've become more and more common. There's so many problems associated with one-step deals, especially for our emerging and middle-class screenwriters. The first one is they are gateways to massive amounts of free work. One of the WGA mantras is there's actually no such thing as a one-step deal. Usually, if you're in your one-step deal, you find yourself often being pressured to do a second step or a third step or even a fourth step for free, sometimes working for weeks and weeks or months and months without pay. And obviously, that's a violation of our MBA, and that's unacceptable. Secondly, screenwriting and all writing is an iterative process, of course, right? So asking a screenwriter to sort of nail their draft in one draft is pretty unreasonable. And what it does when you're a newer screenwriter just getting used to our business, it doesn't enable you to go through a sort of a routine notes process with producers and executives where you learn how to really develop and work towards a shooting script. And having that skill set, not only good for writers, I actually believe it's really good for the studios to cultivate writers that are able to do that and gain the experience to do that. So for 3 negotiation cycles now, this is our 3rd negotiation cycle where we have been asking for mandatory two-step deals, but for writers who are working at under 250% of guild minimum. So this would mostly support and impact, again, our emerging and middle-class writers who I think need the support most and need the most help in terms of battling the constant free work requests that I'm sure everybody on this call is very familiar with. So that's sort of in a nutshell why once again for the 3rd MBA cycle we are pushing for mandatory two-step deals for some of our members.
Now, Michele, the way you described it here, I see a lot of parallels with what we've been hearing on the TV side, where these changes that are happening are taking away opportunities for up-and-coming writers to really understand the whole process. With mini rooms, we're taking away the ability to be part of the TV production process. And with these pushes for you've got to get it right on the first try, it's taking away from screenwriters' ability to really understand the creative process as it should be and as it has been for decades. I want to open up to the rest of the panel if this has been something that you've experienced with losing that extra pay for a polish or for a rewrite, or being pressured by a producer or studio to get the first draft right, or to do extra drafts for no extra compensation. Can anybody speak to that?
Yeah, I certainly can. In my experience, when you get a job to write a script, you go into a room and you're there with the producers or the studio executives. Maybe there's a director, maybe even an actor, like 10 people, and you sit and you talk about the movie you're going to write for hours and hours until you're absolutely sure everyone agrees this is the movie that you're going to go off and write. And then you go off and write it, and you hand that script in, and 9 out of those 10 people will say, I didn't know this was the movie you're going to write. It's just impossible to kind of sit there and talk about a movie and have everyone agree on what it is and be right, and thinking that they're all on the same page, because they're really not until they actually read it. So that's what makes the 2 steps so critical, because you need 1 step just to get everybody on the same page and agree that this is the movie we're making. And then you can take people's notes and refine it and make it into, the movie that everyone wants. A 1-step deal cuts that out. So that makes, then you've got pressure from now the producers saying, okay, we're not going to get a second crack at this, so just give it to me, and then we'll shape it and we'll do work on it, we'll read it, because I think I know what everyone really wants. And so they're basically making you do that second draft for free before you hand in the first draft. And I've seen that countless times. I'm always fighting against it. And it's a way to get free work out of writers. And it's just out of the sheer, business of turning art into something that everyone can read on a page.
I think Stuart identifies something really important here, which is the pressure for free work very rarely comes directly from the studio. It almost always comes from the producers on the project, who are as nervous as we are about the need to get it right on this on this particular draft. And again, having 1 step rather than 2-step deals incentivizes a writer to go along with that and to do free work, because we know that might be the only chance that we get. But if we, if there's a second step built in there, then suddenly that helps empower writers to put our feet down and to say, and to say, okay, at some point we actually have to turn this into the studio. Without that, the pressure is extreme to go along with these requests, because we want to stay on the project too.
Good morning. Of what you guys are saying, it also empowers the writer to know, like you said, Michele, that you don't have to do it in one go. That's a lot of pressure to feel like you have to play a song the first time you're gonna play it perfectly well. It's insane, and it only benefits the writer and the people involved in the studio to have the trust in the writer. Say, we trust you to do 2 plays of the song, so that we can help you play the second one, and you also can come to a better understanding of what the script you're writing is, and to be able to do the rewrite on it for yourself. Not only to mention that if they're only going to hire you for 1 draft, to find another new person to explain what this new script is, to have to do all of that over again, it's just less efficient for them as well. Yeah.
I just say, imagine there's, I was thinking about this the other week, talking to a bunch of screenwriters on the picket lines. There's no 1-step deals in television development. Those don't exist there. Everyone understands it's going to take a bunch of drafts of your pilot to get it right. Imagine giving a director, 1 cut of their movie and they have to nail it, or an actor 1 take when they're performing. It's completely ridiculous. The creative pressure is overwhelming, and Zack's exactly right. The producers feel that pressure too, they're under pressure to turn in a really good draft. And so I sympathize for them. And actually, a lot of producers I talk to really hate 1-step deals, because it doesn't give them the ability to collaborate properly with the writer, so I don't see how it's good for anybody. And again, that's why we are being pretty relentless in fighting for this again.
I like to compare screenwriting. Sometimes it's like firing artillery. That first shot isn't about hitting the target. That first shot is where you see things are going, and you use it to get closer to you use that first shot to get closer to the target.
Now, another part of this whole two-step process and streaming has really changed how much and what kind of films get produced and where. Because right now at the box office, the only films that seem to reliably make money are franchise films and low-budget horror. But streaming has given films that studios might not really consider for theatrical release anymore. It gives them another chance to get produced and to get out there. But at the same time, I imagine that would also force a lot of screenwriters who want to make those kinds of films into this new system where they only get one level of pay, and that there isn't that guaranteed that they're going to get more pay as they work between 6 and 9 months on these movies. I was wondering if you guys could speak to that and how the changing nature of what kinds of movies get produced for streaming versus theaters is affecting the way screenwriters get compensated.
I was going to say, I mean, on one level, streaming has been a godsend because it looked for a bit in the early 2010s like entire categories of feature films were just going to disappear altogether. And as you said, become like giant franchise films and like $5 million horror movies, and that's it. Luckily, things like the rom-com and the mid-budget movies and things like that have come back and found homes on streaming. Unfortunately, because of how opaque the streamers are with audience and metrics and things like that, the way that we get compensated in streaming is very different. For example, in I got residuals for the film that I did for Netflix, but it was all based on the budget of the film, because they don't tell you how many views that you got. So like at least my big complaint, and the funny thing is I don't think it works for the streamers either, is that because they don't share their metrics, there is no system in place for rewarding anyone in success.
I imagine that. I just wanted to add on to that, Zach, that we talk about how the writers are getting short-shrifted in all of this because the streamers are trying to save money. But if, as you said, that you're getting paid based on the budget of the movie, then that incentivizes the writers to not write their scripts in a way that it can be done in a thrifty way. Like it incentivizes them to do the opposite. So you want them to write this movie so that to balloon it to 100 million plus.
And as you see a bunch of $150, $200 million direct to streaming movies where you wonder, like, where did all the money go? And it's literally because all of the incentives are to pump up the budget, because that's the only place that people are getting paid. They're not getting, it's the opposite of like a Clint Eastwood movie where like he takes scale until he recoups the budget and then gets paid some huge amount of the gross, and always comes in ahead of schedule and under budget as a result. All of the incentives are perverse simply because they don't want to share their metrics with anyone.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got two proposals around streaming that are super important to screenwriters. The one that Zach's talking about is just basic streaming transparency. I mean, we have seen major contraction in this industry in terms of the legacy studios and the number of movies that they now make. It's far fewer than they used to make in the past, as we all know. And like Zach said, yeah, it was a great opportunity when the streamers came along and decided, Netflix at one point, we're going to make 80 movies a year. So for screenwriters, we were like, yeah, more opportunity, right? But it's not just that we're not rewarded for success because there's no data transparency, which is something we're fighting for in this negotiation for all writers, obviously anyone working for the streamers. But it's that when you make your deal for a streaming movie, it's a dealer's choice option, with the dealer being the streamer. They can either paper your deal as a theatrical or as a movie of the week. And using these ancient NBA movie of the week terms, it means they can pay you far, far lower residual rate. And so what we're fighting for, again, for the second cycle in this NBA is parity, where our premise, again, is that a movie is a movie is a movie, where all of us on this call, when we sit down to write a movie, it's the same job for us, whether we're doing it for Netflix or whether we're doing it for Disney. It doesn't matter. We're writing 120 pages. We're writing a movie, right? But we don't get, our reps can battle with the streamers, but we don't ultimately get to control which type of contract we have. And we think that everything written for streaming, every movie written for streaming should be under a theatrical contract, because the minimums are higher, and most importantly, the residual rate is higher. The companies get away with messing around with what we call the imputed license fee, which is the basis for the residuals, and there's no transparency there, and it doesn't reflect the value of what we create. That's another central premise of this negotiation, sort of paying writers for the value we create. And that's certainly not happening with streaming movies right now. And so we want to eliminate this dealer's choice nonsense, and we want to sort of get all movies at the same rate wherever they're exhibited. I think that's an important premise and one we're fighting for.
Now let's break this down into the bottom line here. All of this about two steps and residuals. A lot of times, I sure now with this one step pay that screenwriters, they can work 6 to 9 months and they only get one check out of that, and then they would get some small residual checks out of it. If you've got a family living in Los Angeles, that forces you to take that one check and stretch it out. That's what I've heard, whether in film or television. I've heard writers talking about how they are losing the reliable pay they get from writing, so they have to make those checks stretch out for much longer than they used to. I just wondered if you guys could speak to that, and just speak to how all these checks drying up affects the ability of, whether it's you or other writers that you may know, or just in general, affects your ability to make ends meet.
Yeah, well, it used to be, with residuals, you get a second check, and so the life of a screenwriter is very much job to job, and you don't know where the next job's going to come from or when it's going to come. So yeah, you're always making the last check stretch as long as you can. But then if what you wrote was successful, then you get a big residual check, and that would be another bump, and that would allow you to last until you got the next job. Now, with very little or zero residuals, in between jobs, it's really tough to make ends meet for most screenwriters, because, like I say, it's a gig economy. It's a job to job thing, and the residuals were what kept you going, in between those jobs, and they're just really non-existent now because of streaming.
Yeah, and I've got to say the difference that I've gotten in residuals from like being one of 5 or one of 7 writers on a theatrical hit to being the sole writer on a movie that did really well for Netflix is quite stunning. And I will say all of us who wrote features for Netflix owe Eric Heiserer and the Guild legal department big ups, because of the Bird Box lawsuit against or the Bird Box case against Netflix ended up in a lot of us getting a very nice and unexpected bit of residuals from our Netflix movies that we had kind of despaired of ever seeing. So thank you to the Guild, and thank you, Eric, for sticking your neck out on that.
Eric's the hero. In the Guild staff, that arbitration shouldn't have been necessary. Really, all it was Netflix undervaluing the license fee for their streaming movies and not paying what they should have been paying under our NBA terms. So it was a big violation of the NBA, and we were able to win $43 million collectively for a bunch of writers that were owed. And so, that's just an example of what Stuart was saying too is so important. It's again, another big premise of this negotiation for all our members, but including screenwriters, is how can you make your year? What we negotiate is the minimum basic agreement. So we're just negotiating guild minimum wages, it's then up to us and our reps to negotiate what we call overscale terms. And it's really important to remember that for screenwriters, most of the movies we write do not get made, right? So we can't even count on residuals. 9 out of 10 movies that a screenwriter writes don't ever see the light of day. We are sort of the true freelancers of this guild in the sense that, if you're a TV writer, you might get on a show and you might be lucky that show runs, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons. And so you're boarding a moving train and you get to stay on that train for a while. For screenwriters, a job ends and then you've got to go out and hustle and get that next job. And so again, to draw a connection between sort of TV and screenwriter issues in this negotiation, we're battling these short-term mini rooms where someone's just employed for 10 weeks. Well, screenwriters are used to that. On a one-step deal, you can be employed for 10 or 12 weeks and then you're shit out of luck and it's time to go get your next job, right? So we are used to these really short-term periods of employment. And when you're working close to guild minimum or, under double guild minimum, making your year is almost impossible. I mean, it's so difficult, especially when you get a commencement check. So you're budgeting, okay, I've been commenced and in 12 weeks, I'll get my delivery check. Except you don't get your delivery check in 12 weeks because you're asked to do weeks or months of free work. So suddenly you're having to stretch out what should have been a 12-week job over 6 months, 8 months. When you're working near guild minimum, you can't live in Los Angeles or New York on that money. And you're a working screenwriter, you're employed, but you're not being paid enough. And you're not, most importantly, the span of time over which you're getting paid is being stretched so far that you cannot make your year. And given the profits made off of the product that we all create for these streamers in these studios, that's just not acceptable to the guild.
I think also in addition to what you're saying, it goes back to also the second step, because like Michele said, most of the time you're not going to see residuals because the movie's not going to be made for a trillion reasons, none of it to do with the script. You might have written an amazing script, but to have a second guarantee step in terms of stretching a check, now you're stretching 2 checks, right? So that goes hand in hand with this whole thing. And with the residual thing, it's really about, it's a positive way of thinking to say, look at us as your partners. Let us participate in the success of the things we are detonating out of nothing. And, treat us like partners, not contractors, right? We're not. We're the people writing the stories.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the perception of this whole strike. As I said at the top, that this, I think for the average person who's not in Hollywood, I think when they think of the strike, they immediately think of TV because that's what they immediately perceive. Like the late night shows go off the air. There's a question of whether or not the fall TV shows are going to happen. With a strike so immediately impacts television that is what they start thinking of. And also to what Michele said, that 25% of the WGA now are just screenwriters. Once upon a time, that wasn't the case. It was 50% plus screenwriters, but the changing nature of the industry, especially now with streaming, I imagine for a lot of new members, like they go into television, go into streaming to be able to get that check because they don't have that financial security to be able to do what, as you guys said, that freelancer life of writing one screenplay and then trying to get another one out there. With all those changes in the structure of the membership, like, how has that changed your guys' ability to get word out there, like raising awareness of that it's not just a TV thing, and also getting those feature issues resolved in the talks with the studios?
Look, I mean, I've been on the WGA board for 6 years now. This is my second MBA negotiation. I co-chaired the last one. We do not accept the premise that this negotiation is only about television. I can tell you that the negotiating committee is not approaching that this way. I don't think the membership feels like that. I feel the AMPTP with whom we negotiate has a long history of brushing aside features issues and dealing with TV as a priority. This negotiation, we are not allowing that to happen. Everything that remains on the table that we're negotiating for is our priority. The press and the AMPTP would certainly like to frame it that this issue and this issue are the big issues or the sticking points or whatever. I've seen some of that narrative out there. Inside the room, when we're doing this work, that is absolutely not the feeling of this committee. I've never seen in my 20 plus years in the Guild such a huge effort from our membership to support and understand writers working in different work areas. Out on the picket lines, I hear people are grilling me with, the TV writers are grilling me with questions about screenwriting and wanting to understand what we're dealing with more. I'm seeing TV writers talking to comedy variety writers and saying, we need to understand your issues. Everyone is supporting everyone here. Nobody feels like this is a negotiation where one group will win and the others should lose. Absolutely not. So our screen agenda is very focused and very targeted on the things that we think we can accomplish in an MBA and that screenwriters need right now. But we are dead serious about making gains for screenwriters. So with all respect, I just sort of reject the premise that this negotiation is primarily about television. It is not.
And just to wrap it up here, to talk about, for the rest of you guys, about what it has been like with other screenwriters, because as we record this afterwards, there's going to be a picket line with specific focus on screenwriters, because screenwriters picket in front of the Paramount Pictures lot. And I want to just ask the rest of you here on the panel, what has it been like for you guys, picketing with other screenwriters, reaching out to other people? Gareth, how about we start with you, because you're going to have a big DC movie coming out in August. There's quite a good possibility that you might still be on the picket lines when that movie comes out. So what has the picket line experience been for you, being out there with other writers, other screenwriters, etc.?
I mean, it's great. I always believed very deeply in syndicalism, and it's lovely to see it in action. It's how the many little people can be together against the few powerful, and it's very affirming and it's very inspiring. And not to them, the people that are driving by, every truck that honks at you go, there's a person that believes inherently in what you are doing. And it feels really good. It just feels good. It feels good when you feel like you're doing the right thing. It just is affirming.
It's also a chance to meet your creative heroes. It's I don't go to the Austin Film Festival, but like you're out on the picket line and it's like, it's the guys who wrote Ed Wood, and they're willing to talk to you. And you get that a lot. There are a lot of, whoever inspired you to want to do this for a living. The chances are at least one of them is out there, is standing 50 feet away from you holding a picket sign and is kind of bored because they've been here for 2 hours. So they're happy to talk and share stories and things like that, and tell you about the previous 2 or 3 strikes that they've been through. So it's just, as a professional, it's a tremendously affirming thing to tremendously affirming thing to actually see each other face to face.
Yeah, I find it very inspiring. It used to be that meeting people online was a bad thing, but now meeting people on the picket line has got this whole new meaning. So I've met so many wonderful people on the lines, and in all different kinds of fields. And the great thing about picketing with fellow writers is they all have a story to tell. So I've just been kind of asking, so what's your script about? And they'll tell you a story, and it's just great. You get these kind of free movies and TV pilots just pitched to you all day long. And this is great. You kind of movies or you're watching TV, you're just getting someone telling it to you. But they're telling it to you, with all this passion and it's their vision and how they see it and everything. And so, yeah, look, it just helps you to know that you're not alone. It's not just you. And, everyone's kind of going through the same things, so that just makes it just a little bit easier to get through, because, you know that other people have got your back, and that we won't give up until we've got what we need to survive, because that's what this strike is really about. It's about survival.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us here at The Wrap. Thank you so much for sharing your concerns, frustrations with the current status quo. I will keep up seeing how things go with the writer's strike and with screenwriters specifically. And you can continue staying up to date. I'll be watching out there on all the news regarding the strike on TheWrap.com. We also encourage you to check out our Wrap Pro membership hub, focusing on serving professionals in the entertainment space. And save the date, October 4th, we have our annual event, The Grill. It's an annual conference focusing on the convergence of entertainment, media, and technology. We'll have more details on that announced soon. In the meantime, I'm Jeremy Fooster, and thank you very much for watching.